Testing, 1, 2, 3. I think I can hear myself as well. Good afternoon. I'm Sam Burston. I'm VP of University Relations and External Affairs here at the Clark Atlanta University. And this has been a whirlwind Monday. I started here this morning hosting, and of course, the dean, Dr. Davis, the cool one, he called him the seasoned one. He took over the program, and Dr. Udoka spoke, and you had a fantastic legacy leadership award and luncheon program. And here this afternoon, we're going to have our innovation ecosystems and place making session. So before we continue the program, I wanted to, my good buddy, and we talk about astronomy, astrology, and all those things, Tony Cooper, to come up to make a comment. Tony, let's give Tony a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you. Sam says we talk about a lot of crazy things. We still argue over who's the bigger Trekkie or Trekker, because I grew up on Star Trek. Listen, I want to thank everybody, and especially the panelists that showed up. I hope you will show out. And also wanted to apologize. In our luncheon, we had an unscheduled fire drill, and I think we lost a few people, took the opportunity to leave. But that's okay, because that just means that the next two panels are really just going to be a lot more intimate than we planned, but that's good. And I wanted to issue a challenge, not only to our panelists and the people that are here, but to the deans, and particularly those that are members of the National HBCU Business Deans Roundtable. We were hoping that these panels would inspire you as a group in the same way that the original 17 institutions were back in 1945. They didn't just meet and talk, they met, talked, and planned. And within that next year, we had the world's first graduate business school at an HBCU, and the dominoes fell from there. Almost every major HBCU with a business program. Those guys decided what it would look like within our environments. So I challenge you to have this intimate discussion with our panelists, ask the questions that you want to ask specific to your institution. We recognize that at our HBCUs, we don't have the resources in quite the same way that the majority institutions may have. And typically you have a communications department or an innovation person for the entire school. I'm challenging you guys to look at how you can find resources to be specific about the business schools and programs, and maybe if it's cost prohibitive, to look at how groups like the National Business Deans can collaborate to accomplish some of these things. So I hope this will be a constructive discussion, our next two panels. I hope you will ask questions, and I hope you guys will add it to your agenda at the next Business Deans meeting to take steps to take action on what was discussed here today. So with that, I'll turn it back to our MC. Thank you again.
And let's give Tony a big round of applause for what he does. And I am a Trekkie. Does the good of the many outweigh the good of the few, or the one, per Mr. Spock? And since this is a 75th Jubilee celebration, when you drive out tonight and look in the eastern sky and see the brilliance of Jupiter tonight, it's the brightest it will be for another 6 years. So that's in celebration of this Jubilee, just in case you didn't know. So let's give yourselves a big round of applause for that. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Paul Wilson Jr., VP Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Russell Innovation Center for Entrepreneurs. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And again, it sounds like you all have had an incredible day up until this point, so we look to continue that momentum. So those of you who are, and actually I'm going to just ask a question first. How many of you are familiar with the Russell Innovation Center? Great. So I don't need to give you a history. Or need to give you a history either of Mr. Herman J. Russell. And one thing I will say, and I think it is very relevant to today, when he put the building right at the headquarters on that corner, it was with the intention that when students matriculated from this area, they could see what success was possible for them. And so again, he was very tied to this community, very tied to HBCUs, very tied to the AU Center overall. And again, so it's amazing that, again, 70 plus years later, the building is still there. And of course, now it's been transformed, starting in 2017, right, into the Russell Innovation Center with a focus on entrepreneurship. And we know the history, again, of us as a community, as Black people, placemaking has been critical for us, usually houses of worship, community centers, and other areas. And so now, another little nugget I heard about him is he used to say, or at least he told at least one person, that entrepreneurship centers should be like churches, one on every corner, right? So that's how much he was passionate and believed in entrepreneurship. So maybe we're getting started with that from that standpoint. So placemaking and innovation, of course, is critical in those ecosystems. So I'm excited to introduce our panel today, who again are all very knowledgeable and experts in this space around placemaking and innovation and entrepreneurship. So first, I'm gonna start in the middle with the Dr. Tiffany Rogers Bussey, Executive Director, Morehouse Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center, and I'll give her a chance to definitely introduce herself. We also have James Harris. I'm gonna go down and come back. I'm not gonna forget about you. James Harris, co-founder and partner of Core Venture Studio, and Tarek Tidwell, Director, Inclusive Innovation and VentureWell. Please welcome our panelists for today. And again, I would like each one of you to kind of just go down the line and kind of talk about your role, but also the organization that you're associated with and kind of some of your core focus areas, especially in relation to our topic for today.
So I guess ladies first?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, great. Thank you. Thanks again for the invite. It's an awesome pleasure. Even though we're right across the street, we don't get the opportunity to come on each other's campus. It's always a pleasure coming to CAU. As Paul indicated, I'm Tiffany Bussey. I have been at Morehouse for 18 years. And I just told Tyreek here, pushing the boulder up a hill. When I got to Morehouse, this whole idea of entrepreneurship was still in its infancy. We all know that it has grown and really taken traction perhaps the last 18 years, 10 years or so. It was still being debated whether entrepreneurship can be taught or is it something innate, right? So I had colleagues coming down the hallway screaming at me, you can't teach entrepreneurship. So, but here we are, 18 years later. We focus on what we call simply one mission: start, sustain, and grow Black businesses, whether it is with our students or businesses in the community. We do recognize that the only way, or one of the ways, for closing the income inequality gap or achieving economic empowerment is through business ownership. And so it is important for us at Morehouse, as we matriculate our students, that they have an idea of what it is to start a business and to be entrepreneurially minded. I'm going to emphasize that because one of the first things I guess you really wrestle with is, how do you define entrepreneurship and innovation on your campuses? And for us at Morehouse, it's broadly defined as being entrepreneurially minded, having the skill set and a way to think entrepreneurially, solving problems, critical thinking, not necessarily starting a business. Because of who we are, four-year, liberal arts, undergraduate, we think that that best fits who we are, which is another point in consideration as you think about where does this sit and what does it mean for your campus. And I'm gonna pause there.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. So, good afternoon, everyone. James Harris, true honor to be here. I've learned so much this morning. I just want to thank you for your commitment to being part of this program. I'd also like to honor my family and my history. I would not be here without Clark Atlanta University. My mother graduated Clark's nursing program in the early 60s. My father went to Morehouse undergrad, but graduated from Clark's MBA program in '69 and went on to be one of the first Black executives at Exxon and their first computer scientist. And going back even further, my great-great-uncle, after seeing Clark, the original Clark, which is over now, I guess it's Carver High School, was so inspired, rode back into the city. He and friends put together $1,000 and founded Morris Brown College. That was Bishop John Wesley Gaines. I also had the privilege of working as the interim director of the Russell Center many years ago on behalf of the Russell family. And we partnered with Clark to run the CREATE program. We graduated 60 Black food entrepreneurs, one of which, our best student, just raised $1.2 million in January and went from $250,000 to now $4 million in 2 years. So thank you, Clark. I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you. as an entree into placemaking, it is important for me to also acknowledge that I've had the privilege of helping create things like Hypopotamus, one of the first co-working spaces here in Atlanta that was free. Free electricity, internet, chairs, desks, just come be a great business. Though that was at Georgia Tech, 65% of the teams that came through were teams of color, and of those teams, 90% were women of color. We had the privilege of also building out 3 other versions of that, as well as working with the Annie Casey Foundation to build what is now called Pittsburgh Yards, which is a 31-acre campus dedicated to black entrepreneurship because it sits in historically black community, the Pittsburgh community, which is also the community that Clark College was founded in. We now actually are moving into a phase of owning and buying buildings. We have Concept House in Castleberry, 24,000 square feet, 30 entrepreneurs, 90% black women, 80% in e-commerce and natural beauty. And we'll talk about sectors and placemaking around particular sectors. But last but not least, I've also been spending a lot of time in Tuskegee, Alabama, connecting black farmers with black entrepreneurs, co-packer light manufacturing, hospitality, food and beverage, because there was a place created for us to be exceptional entrepreneurs. It was a vision of Booker T. Washington in 1881, when he by chance bought 5,000 acres and said, I'll teach anyone that's black how to farm. And so I want us to think about placemaking not only in a building or a block or a corner, but there were cities built for us to actually do this. And hopefully we can talk about some of that in this program. Thank you.
Thank you.
I should have went before you then. You definitely give me a chance. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Tarek Tidwell. I am the Director of Inclusive Innovation at VentureWell. VentureWell is a venture development organization that's on a mission of cultivating a pipeline pathways for entrepreneurs and innovators. We've invested money into institutions and also into entrepreneurs, student entrepreneurs, over $13 million plus over the last 25 years that have had follow-on funding of more than $2 billion of capital raised, and also supporting all the innovators who are looking at clean energy, renewable energy, deep science, things that will move our society forward, focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Prior to being at VentureWell, which has only been 2 months, I was at Johnson C. Smith University as the Executive Director of the Smith Tech Innovation Center. It was barren, it was nothing, it was an idea, it was one paper, maybe one paragraph, to have something that was going to be transformational on a small HBCU campus. And over the last 6.5 years, built it up where it became something of an anchor for the community, a connector for the community, and also for entrepreneurs who are looking to say, how can I take this idea and build it out into something that could be commercialized? And one of the successes was one of our entrepreneurs we launched out of there. This past year, she raised $1.5 million with in seed money. That was something that's focused on sustainable, renewable weave. and it was something which is,
industry.
Yep, and it's one of the things which is HBCUs are a catalyst for transforming and enabling entrepreneurs. And this is something that I definitely believe in and actually want to continue to work on.
Absolutely. Thank you all. One of the things that we talk about at the Russell Center, and I want you all to kind of speak to this too, is a sense of belonging, right? Having a place that we can come and call home, especially in this case from a business standpoint. So we're definitely going to talk about the economic and some of those aspects, but let's first talk about the psychological criticality and importance of having a place of belonging for entrepreneurs, and particularly black entrepreneurs in our communities. We can start here, Tarek, and we'll just kind of go down the line.
Yeah, I mean, the most important, many years ago, I got a chance to work with some folks with New Me, Angela Benton's we created the first minority accelerator. That was back in 2008. The sense of belongingness is critical when you start thinking about, where do I see myself show up? Where's my identity? Do I see myself being represented well in this kind of culture? Are the cultural nuances particularly speaking to me? So I think, belonging is at the core, right? The sense of equity and also, like, diversity is one thing, but the sense of equity and belongingness definitely is necessary, a building block for ensuring that folks that look like us and are going to be entrepreneurs are in a safe environment. Because it is like, how do I feel about building trust? And belongingness is at the center of building trust.
Absolutely.
Interesting topic, right? Because as we start looking at our curriculum and how it makes a difference for our students, we looked at the research, and the research said that there's basically 10 characteristics between 10 and 12 that really defines an entrepreneur. At the core of it is confidence, the acceptance of failure in terms of risk, and really having that persistency. So when we start teaching that and looking at our community, I think we had to take a step back and look at what was in the marketplace for curriculums, and it didn't really quite address who we are. In the 5 years, we were force-feeding something. When I got to Morehouse, I was told, go over to Georgia Tech, take a look at what they're doing, and come back and implement it here. It did not work. I knew then that we had to find something that was unique to our community. And I think where we are right now, we've just instituted, this is the second semester, we're running a course on Black entrepreneurial mindset. And it's really looking at the history of Black culture and people in order for us to now acknowledge that and be able to start having our students start thinking and seeing themselves as an entrepreneur. So you asked the question about belonging, but I would say that it goes a bit before belonging. I have to see myself in order to know that I'm going to belong somewhere. And it is now that space that we're looking at, how do we teach and how do we change the curriculum to teach our community? Because what's available right now is not working. And so I want to say that the idea of belonging, yes, but also the idea of where that teaching comes from. Representation matters. Thank you.
So, and I think going back to the idea of trust and belonging, right? Entrepreneurship is a lonely, lonely, lonely business and experience. And so having a place where you can, I hate to say this, cry when you get bad news from a client and everybody's like, oh, buy the guy lunch or what, whatever that is, that's important. Being able to have an immediate demand, I need a room for a weekend, and trust that there's somebody, you belong to a group that says, you can use my garage, or we're not using this back area. That's super important. Often people say, well, no, I won't take the new opportunity because I don't have anyone that I belong, I don't have a group that I belong to where I can go for resources and support. I honestly think for HBCUs and the resources and campuses and things that you all have, that's a huge benefit in the perception of entrepreneurship. We mentored a group called, they're called Myavana now, but they were called Texturize. And their theory was if they could take 3 strands of a woman's hair and look at it under an electron microscope, they could tell you everything about yourself. Your diet, what vitamins you're missing, what side of bed you slept on, the whole 9 yards. But they were leveraging Georgia Tech's electron microscope to do that, right? And so y'all have many resources, I think, that can help people belong as part of the entrepreneurial journey.
I also want to just add that entrepreneurship is a team sport,
Absolutely.
right? And so when we, again, and I go back to really teaching, because this is the students that I'm working with before they become that entrepreneur, so to speak, having that mindset that I have to find a team and being able to open. One of the first things they do, they come to the office and they're like, I don't want to share my ideas. I'm afraid somebody's going to take my ideas. So we got to break that tendency. And that comes again probably from trust. And we have good reasons in our history why we don't trust, right? So again, we have to really sort of go back and really uncover these things. And it is psychological and being able to break it down. It is not all about just business acumens. It's about really getting in the mind and understanding it.
And that's critical, right? Because we have to create places that are safe for people to fail and fly, right? And oftentimes, especially in a lot of entrepreneur ecosystems, it's all about, it's competition, right? And it's kind of, I got to beat out the person next to me. But I think is what I hear you all saying, and you can continue on that, right, is how are we working together? How are we cooperating or even coopetition, right, using that environment. So we're learning from one another, right, and leveraging one another versus fighting against each other. And I think that is critical for long-term success of entrepreneurs from that standpoint. So when we think about curriculum, because I think we can kind of roll into that, a lot of times in social media makes people think, right, entrepreneurship is easy, right? Just throw up a nice post here or there, have a nice viral campaign, you're successful. But we know it goes a lot deeper than that, and there's a lot more involved in that. So talk about, as part of, again, the entrepreneurial experience, and Tiffany, you started down that path. What does curriculum look like, and how do we connect curriculum to real world things that are happening and kind of be able to merge the two together as well as other things that need to be happening?
Sure. I think there's two parts to this. There's the curricula for credit piece, which is very much theoretical. And then there's the co-curricular, which is experiential, right? You cannot teach entrepreneurship within the four walls of a classroom. They have to take action. They have to get out. They have to see it. They have to do it. It is about practice. So you need two parts to that when you're really doing it. For us, we started, I guess, as 18 years ago, on more focus on the co-curricular pieces. A student come with their ideas, we have them talk through what it is and really start connecting them to mentors and figuring out, is this really going to work? We just approved a minor end of the summer. This is the first semester that we're executing it. It sits under the business division, although it is interdisciplinary. That's the other thing, that true companies that work, we know that they have interdisciplinary focus, different people, different races, different sex, different disciplines. So we are looking for the psychology major, the science major, any major to be able to take this entrepreneurship minor. That's a different way of looking at it, and it wasn't an easy thing to pass CEPC, but we got it. So we are here doing that, but I would say two tracks for us. The co-curricular is really getting students to come into a space, as we've talked about, to just talk about their ideas. They do have some formal programming there, but it's more about them really working on their businesses, being able to have a small fund. They get $2,500 to tweak and do customer discovery and be able to go outside of the campus and to engage with programs such as the Russell Center and others in the community, and to be able to file for LLC if that's what's necessary at that particular point. But it needs both pieces.
Tariq, could you build on that? Because you talked about you were at Johnson C. Smith and
Everything she said.
right.
We've been in this fight together for a while. I mean, definitely, as you can hear, it's literally linking the experiential learning to the community and using the community as an accelerator and also as a thought partner. And I think that's where you start thinking about how do we increase the capacity of the organization. It's really about understanding what's going on in the ecosystem. And the students being able to go out there and see all these resources, bring it back, see how to process it. And really, I think that's one of the things which is helping students and helping the institution, we used to call it expand the absorptive capacity, which is being able to see the dynamics of everything going around and being able to extract it and bring it back, create value out of it, and then figure out a way to disseminate it or acquire additional resources. That's a lot. We can't be in all places at one time. And that co-curricular opportunity gives the institution and the students that opportunity and the pathway to do all of that.
Absolutely. And James, you can definitely continue on this theme, because when you think about, let's say, outreach to the community, that's an ecosystem, right? It's not in isolation. It is definitely connecting out. And you kind of maybe continue on that theme as it relates to that.
I think I have more questions than answers there. I mean, I started 3 businesses while I was in college, right? I see a lot of young entrepreneurs in school right now. I see social influencers. I met a young lady online. I didn't meet her. I sent her a message on Instagram, but every weekend she goes out to different camping sites, and she has like 50,000 followers. And there's another sister in Oakland who just cut a deal with REI to have an outdoor clothing line called Outdoor Afro, right? And so I guess the question I have is, how are you as business schools actually reaching out to them to say, I know you need accounting. I mean, if you're cutting deals with REI, right? I mean, can I get some accounting students in here to help? I mean, they need the law students, right? I mean, I think business is different. I ran into some young brothers, they take those little scooters and they collect them at night and they put them in vans, and they're, making $60,000, $70,000 a year doing it. I think in that sense of business, I'm interested in how I can even help you take your students and put them in the path of these growing and accelerating businesses. I don't know the scooter people are ever gonna work on the NBA Clark, not in the near term, but clearly that idea for Black wealth creation is needed and both sides are needed, right? And so That's my question more than the answer.
And James, I probably don't have the answer, but I'll tell you how we're doing it. So we welcome all students. I think we've allowed the conversation around entrepreneurship to be overtaken by the tech people. So there's a paradigm out there that tech equals entrepreneurship. One of the things we have to realize is that it's a pipeline of all businesses, whether it is your side hustle or whether it's that influencer, and that's the messaging that we have to really tell our students. That if you have a student in her dorm room doing here and making $50,000 to pay herself through college, we welcome that also, and we have the space to come and get that help. We have days where we have alums that are intellectual property lawyers that are there to give them free counsel. We have the SBDC at Morehouse, which is an office right on the first floor that also offers, and we have welcomed them to be a part of that, and the students know that they're welcome to get counseling there also. So it's really meeting those students and not allowing the definition to be that narrow, that it's only tech business.
I was just going to, there's more of something that just came to mind, and it's something we were thinking about, which is there's a lot of black ownership. There's a lot of black-owned businesses. There are not a lot of black-owned employee businesses, right?
Solopreneurs.
We have solopreneurs. That's another alternative for employment. So the number of black, owned businesses with employees makes up less than 2% of receipts of revenue of all the businesses in the country. However, we have a significant proportion of black entrepreneurs compared to our black population. That's the challenge. How do we move beyond and say, how do we increase from 2% to 10% to 20%? And a lot of that comes down to some of the stuff we're talking about, which is how do we help scalable businesses? How do we encourage scalable enterprises? Great, you want to have a barbershop? Awesome. How are you going to scale that barbershop? One of the brothers from Johnson Smith University called No Grease, and it actually has a shop down here. Scaled it from one enterprise to now having 10, built a school that is actually IP. Turned the school into intellectual property, so therefore anyone who leaves there, creates a business based upon that training, has intellectual property royalties, right? Scalable. Same, you can do the same thing for a business, you can do anything. How do you create something that's scalable? And I think that's something which is missing from this disconnect from tech entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship. How do you create something that's repeatable and scalable? And I think that's the bridge that can bring us together.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's one of the things that capital, right, is a part of that, but also things that are the less sexy sides of business, right, that we don't want to talk about. Infrastructure, right, processes, contracts, right, those kind of things. Right, is also a critical part of that entrepreneurship conversation, not just the front-facing side, what's kind of going on behind the scenes. I want to shift a little bit to talk about literally buildings, right, real estate, because all of you, right, have been involved in that, and then definitely want to open up to the audience for questions. But talk about how you're strategically utilizing real estate in your buildings to continue with pacemaking, the ecosystem building, and this, not just sense of belonging, but how do you wrap it all together, right, from that standpoint?
I have a tiny little room. It was really a small closet that we, like squatters' rights, and we repurposed it. So I'm really, really jealous of our colleagues across the street at Spelman that is building a brand new innovation center. It's my hope and dream that in the next few years there will be one across the street also for Morehouse and one for CAU and everyone else, right? But I often envy Georgia Tech for some reason. They're right down the street, has blocks and blocks and blocks of innovation centers and everything around there, right? So I joke with them and say we need to come across the railroad tracks to over on the southwest side and have some of that. So it is my hope that that's going to be done. But we utilize what we have, right? We're innovative in that way also. So we have different location across the campus, which might be okay also. So sciences have their little space with a maker space. I was told there's a digital lab for the C-STEM students for storytelling and understanding the creatives. And then the business school has the most recent Blackstone Launchpad. So there are little, what I consider little fires across the campus, right? And hopefully those little fires then spark this big bonfire that creates this whole movement. So I'm not quite in favor that it has to be centralized. So I'm okay with that, and I like the speed that we're growing, but I would really love a nice spanking new building.
Yeah. So we use, our innovation center at the time, we use that as a spark plug to create the other spaces around the campus. I think which is, you need a model of hope and aspiration. And once you see that model, I said, look, great, take it and put it in another department, put another division, put another college, whatever. Great, because the ecosystem cannot survive in isolation. The maker space is in the library. The business department created their own. They even want to say, where did you get that furniture from? Okay, here's where we got the furniture from. It's very specialized. Create a sense of environment, engagement, and then have it be mutually reinforced on the campus. And additionally, we opened up our innovation center to the community, right? We hosted stuff to bring the community in. Hey, we want to have a digital hip hop summit to talk about hip hop, tech, and entrepreneurship, and bringing in kids, bringing in folks to talk about how they see, these things being interlined, and also bringing in like partners from. We hosted the Carolinas HBCU summit, which is like, let's talk about policy, right? Let's talk about things that's happening in our communities that affects us and that we have to deal with. Like, great, we're incubators for change, but also how are we changing the community and how we're informing policy. Like, several of our HBCUs are in opportunity zones or in close proximity. What does that mean for the conditions that we have to operate in? What does that mean for how we have to either create value or extract value and support the history of our community, right? So there's a lot of things which is opening up, creating a safe space for those conversations to happen and for people to be able to trust that this is going to be a really good environment for them to have that exchange.
Yeah, I'm in a different space, right? So I don't have academic resources. Y'all have beautiful buildings.
I'm at academia now.
Electricity and all these wonderful things. We have to sort of build our own. But what we're finding is that being entrepreneurial, if you ask the community, they'll tell you what they need, right? Mm-hmm. We desperately need commercial kitchens, right? If you work for X company, but you want a side hustle, you can cook or your aunt can cook. We need commercial kitchens. In Fulton County, it's against the law to share a commercial kitchen, right? So we need some policy around that, right? We need innovative space for Black beauty makers. We need chemistry labs. We need chemists, right? Because these sisters are watching YouTube and they're literally in their kitchen making things. And by grace, they're not usually making things that you ingest, but they're building $1 million businesses off of a YouTube video, a TikTok video. But they really need chemists. They really need a lab, right? And so those kinds of things are really important. If you ask the community, they'll tell you. And I think some of y'all have those resources. I'll give you one great example. We were really blessed to get funding from Atlanta Wealth Builder Initiative. We partnered with a woman named Makuba Dawkins, who's an industry maven, just an amazing resource. She created the Breed Love Accelerator Program. We had 28 Black beauty makers, one man, all the rest women, and we learned a lot from them. And so what we learned is that during COVID, their supply chain was non-existent. We heard stories like, well, I didn't ship this week because Junebug didn't show up at the flea market with the rosemary oil. We're like, you can't build a business on Junebug. You have to have a relationship with farmers or real industry people to make it happen. And so out of that came this idea that we are now piloting in the city of Tuskegee. We acquired 8.5 acres. We call it Beauty Farm. These beauty makers want to go to a farm and learn about herbs and rosemary and lavender. They don't want to pretend they actually know. They want to actually harvest it, make their own essential oils. They want to take pictures of this, and they say, now, do you do it for the gram? You put it on Instagram? Like, they want to have social proof that they're actually farming this stuff and putting in the products. And their e-commerce numbers, they say, will go through the roof, right? And so that's a special place. I never thought in my lifetime I'd be back on the farm, but I'm getting ready to spend a bunch of time on the farm, and they want to be on the farm. And so I think if we ask the community, they'll tell you. And so I'm hoping an HBCU picks up natural black beauty, right? Or natural fabrics, right? The new cottons that people are making and weaving them using no dyes. I mean, I think y'all have a real opportunity to pioneer and sort of divide and conquer. Who's going to be the one for CBD, and who's going to be the one for natural beauty, and who's going to be the one for all these things, so that 10 years from now we look back and the first place entrepreneurs think about going to get help and support and being part of a place is an HBCU business program.
And collaboration is a key part of that. You mentioned collaborating right across the HBCUs, but even intercollaboration on campuses sounds like it's a pretty critical opportunity there also. So definitely want to open up to the audience to have questions for any of these panelists. Yes, sir.
My name is Yao Edu, and I chair the business department at Morris Brown College. We do have a business certificate program, and part of what I shared with the board prior to hiring me was that I was disrupted. So coming into this space, I feel very comfortable. 70% of our instruction happens online, including the business certification program. I would love to hear some ideas about, because, Morehouse and Jason C. Smith, all these really big schools have the land, have the space, the interaction for students, but how can this happen online? If I can get some ideas, I'll be very happy. Thank you.
So, one of the most things I would ask is, who's facilitating the online instruction? The thing is, can we recreate some of the online pieces that we have on the ground on the ground virtually? It is all about trust, right? It's all about trust and maintaining and managing that kind of trust with the students. And that's really about engagement. Students are going to be engaged as much as the person who's delivering it is engaged. If it's just read, show up, and maybe have a conversation, they're going to be disengaged, distracted. So I think a little bit is about ensuring that the folks who are delivering programs online virtually are able to facilitate trust, because we're a trusting community, right? If we don't trust you first, we're not going to learn from you second. So if we don't get that part built up first, the building blocks for that kind of virtual environment, then it's all for naught. So I would go back to the building blocks and focus on trust building for engagement.
May I ask, who's your target audience for the program?
About 60% of our incoming students are between the ages of 28 and 33.
Are they already entrepreneurs, or?
A good number of them are. And there's no problem with trust. The hard reset is quite set from our standpoint. What we're looking for, we just got back on track, right? So that means that the infrastructure that we had before, we are negotiating and getting the infrastructure back in terms of buildings and things of that nature. Yes, we do have an esports performance space. Yeah. So for now, a lot of our students that we meet, the esports lab is where we have one-on-one interaction in terms of meeting a student beyond virtual, right? So there's no problem with trust. I guess what I'm really asking is, since we are shooting and being disruptive and innovative, I'm listening, I'm trying to form an advisory board to assist me to be creative in how can we sustain our brand, how can we sustain the certification program so that we can not only attract students, now they don't have to be smart, they just have to have the zeal to want to make a buck, the hustle mentality, right? So we can nurture those. I have written a Fulbright scholarship. I am looking abroad. I'm trying to take students abroad so that we can pick some, being very different in terms of picking up some companies' cases and then developing and things of that nature.
Is the delivery sync or on sync? Are you doing it live sessions or?
Some courses, yes.
Some courses. Because the reason I ask those, since the pandemic, it has forced us, all of our courses or sessions to the business community has been online.
Right.
And we've been very successful. Where it doesn't work is when they're pre-recorded and the students is just expected to go on and kind of self-pace.
Right.
Those numbers have been falling.
Right.
But when it's live sessions, students are showing up, they're engaged, and we're seeing the results.
Right.
So I would say maybe look at the methodology of delivery and just kind of take start collecting the data around that. But we've been having really good success with the live sessions online.
Okay.
No problem.
I would certainly want to connect with all three of you so we can have some unique sessions and make some money in this process.
Yes. So just one last point, and you may research like what Nordstrom is doing and BMW's been doing, but I don't know if you've invested in a studio, right? A lot of complaints that I've heard, and we've run a number of accelerated programs through COVID, the talking head is really tough. We've seen people innovate. I don't know if you know Saks Fifth Avenue, I think they're shooting for 20% of their sales to be online. They actually use a store when it's closed as their studio set to help teach and demonstrate how things work. For a lot of these young people, it's all in the screen, and the more rich you can make that, the more they want to be engaged, the more they remember, the more they call back. As visual learners to say, I remember you did this, this, and this, and you took a left. And believe it or not, that really sits well in their brain.
I want to double down on something which is sustainability, right? It seems like revenue. Where do you find new resources for programs and partners? There's a few things that I think, probably to your point, probably to some of the other business deans is looking at, which is a program called STTTR. How many are you familiar with STTTR? All right, partnering with those businesses in terms of they have to partner with a institution, and they're even more so saying we want you to partner with MSIs. That's coming down the pike very soon, very, very soon. Given the whole racial equity executive order, that's coming down the pike because most of those folks have been going back to the same institutions time and time again, and that has not gave enough opportunity to some of our other institutions or HBCUs. And there's a lot in that kind of vein, which is you can get your students to become those researchers, become part of that business, to understand the business, to understand how to market that business while also being a part of it and getting some revenue for your institution. But I think there's also another point, which is you said global. That is very critical right now. We got to search for new markets and new spaces. Okay, where our population is not increasing, it's decreasing. We got to look for new markets. I am a Fulbright scholar. I'll be going to Egypt to do innovation entrepreneurship later this year in the Ministry of Higher Education and Research and Scientific Development. They're looking for partners. They got a Japanese university in Egypt. I said, how did you get a Japanese university in Egypt, right? Where in the heck did you start speaking Arabic and Japanese at the same time? But there's ways in which our culture is exportable, right? It is exportable. You know who has the biggest, largest hip hop contract to go out of the country? UNC Chapel Hill, right? Over $15 million plus. Our culture is exportable. Finding ways to take something that we're good at and export it and go into other countries, different markets, and using what we already have. So I would just further that thought process, which is encouraging faculty to become a Fulbright specialist or scholar. I'm not a faculty. In fact, I don't even have a PhD. They're looking for our expertise. I had someone from the country of Georgia says, we identify with HBCUs because we are trying to navigate from post-conflict. There's no other country that we can learn from or no other group we can learn from that had to deal with post-conflict higher education development. Everyone was developed out of prestige and out of certain kind of conditions. There's some things that people are looking for, and we have the actual ingredients to export it. So think about that as well for sustainability purposes.
We have another question
Yes.
back here.
Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Adams. I'm a 2000 graduate of Clark Atlanta University. I work at UPS in supplier diversity. One of the questions that I have is how are we preparing students for long-term engagements around the trade industry? So I know in higher learning, we tend to focus students more towards the business route or the IT route or the sciences. But I work in an industry that is very lucrative for trade. So truck drivers, construction workers, owning those types of businesses. One of the largest African-American owned trucking companies is right here in Atlanta. How are we preparing students to look at things differently when it comes from areas in which we truly thrive in and don't require necessarily education around from post-secondary education?
That's not me. Somebody else want to take that? That would put me out of business.
Yeah, well, I think it's the question is, what are the 21st century trades, right? What is a 21st century trade? Because a lot of these things are becoming more trade specific. A trade is a way of getting a credential, a certification, apprenticeship. We embedded an apprenticeship program into our computer science department program. How can we take a venture capital, XYZ, and turn it into an apprenticeship style program? That is a trade. So I think it's about reimagining the thought process of trades in the schools of professional schools and seeing how the market is changing and how do we change with it? How do we extract? If we're in a big construction community, where there's a huge number of construction, then let's figure out there may be 21st century trades in our disciplines that we can find. Construction management is a trade. So I would push the fact of looking at 21st century trades. Yes, we still need plumbers. Yes, we still need truck drivers, but also how can we integrate the trades into our disciplines and have them be able to speak to some of the Department of Labor standards?
We have another question, but I just want to state we need both.
Yeah.
I'm here because I have a grandfather and great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather that ran a business that still operates today in the South. We're over 100 years old. And every last one of them was about getting education and the trade. You can have a great trade, but if you don't know how to run your business, if you don't know accounting, you don't know some of the basics, it's not going to last. We have a question from one of our deans.
And maybe one other point too, Tony, it's the way we're teaching now also is innovation is being disruptive. So you may not know the trade, but you understand the business model. So the founder of Uber did not drive a taxi cab, but he understood that the problem that they were solving was the accessibility to getting a taxi cab. So they really disrupted the way that the taxi service works. So if we're teaching these critical thinking skills and a way of solving and looking into the marketplace to understand problems and challenges, I think our students are going to get it and be able to bring the resources together to formulate that team and be able to execute. They themselves may not know, but they will go out and find a team that can be able to do that.
All right. It just reminds me, I think there's a three-legged stool. So you've got trade, you've got owning a business, but then you've got these corporations. When I look to that back page to see who the sponsors are, right, where these business schools were caught in this thing. I came to Atlanta U, back in the day it was Atlanta U, to be an entrepreneur, but then got those funny looking corporate handcuffs, did well and went up, right? So when we talk about lucrative, it's all really is relative to where you can imagine. And part of what as I circle back to work with business schools and talk to a lot of deans, given the priorities that a lot of our schools have, and you've got to chase and you've got to go out and get the dollars, and we've got to certainly have some jobs because a lot of parents don't want their kids home in the garage, right? You got to get a job first. Then you can go out and be an entrepreneur. What would you suggest business schools that aren't further down the road, where do you start? Because your president, everybody's coming with a lot of different things. Where do you start? Because we just don't have the resources.
I say you start by the way you're going to define it. I love the idea of the corporation. We now have corporations coming to us saying they're recruiting for entrepreneurial students. So if we broadly, again, define this as the way of thinking and solving problems, which employer will not say that's the person they're looking for? So no, they're supporting it. And also the terminology a few years ago was intrapreneurs. Every company wants to, if not, it's gonna die if you're not being dynamic. So it's how you tell that story and how you define it for that institution and being able to really respond to your stakeholders, which are those corporations. They're the ones now supporting this whole idea of entrepreneurship because we've broadly defined it. And we're saying that with this education of understanding how to think and disrupt industries, you can now use the students. The other thing we do is also encourage our students, go out into corporate world first, and learn that industry that you're passionate about. Find out how it's done on somebody else's dime, and then come back or then start your business. So this is a long game, and I think we're not going to see the results if we're looking at the number of businesses started, at least from the educational perspective, for years to come, because this is not something that's going to happen overnight for us if we look at it that way.
So we have one more question.
I was going to.
May I just add on to that for one
Sure.
second? And I don't have an academic answer for you, but what I will say is divide and conquer amongst yourselves. Pick something that is a strength, that you have assets, core knowledge, intellectual property in, and become really good at that and become known for that. And I think also people will find you, corporations, but also the talent will come and seek you out because you'll be known for that thing. Morris Brown has always been known for hospitality, food, and beverage. Right? Pastors, all these things. You have that same opportunity today. You don't have to ask permission. We're actually waiting on you, to be frank with you. And if you don't take it, I think someone else said, your competition's aggressive. Georgia State will take it. I mean, Georgia Tech will happily say yes to almost anything that they think can bring a long-term gain to their endowment. So just a word of encouragement, you're asking the right question, and I think it's really amongst looking inwardly and figuring out where are you exceptional, and really putting that out there in front of people.
Yeah.
So James, what you're saying is each school has its own traditions, histories, and strong places. Find your sweet spot, because innovation applies to anything we do.
Yeah.
Being entrepreneurial, whether you work in a corporation or you're in business for yourself, is definitely about being innovative. Companies today are hiring not employees, they're looking for people who will be entrepreneurial. We have one more question, and then maybe one more after that, and then we need to move on to our next panel.
Donald Andrews, Dean College of Business, Southern University. I just want to know how you're utilizing and leveraging, say, federal resources in terms of various governmental organizations such as MBDA, Department of Defense mentor-protege programs in terms of developing programs within our institutions, and how can we leverage as HBCUs in terms of the strengths that we have in numbers of programs. I know in terms of the Venture Challenge, which I think started here at Clark Atlanta, that was an excellent program, and so how can we continue that tradition in terms of finding the resources that we need to fund these programs and to give these individuals who want to be entrepreneurs the opportunity and time it takes? Because there are going to be failures, but how can they more or less move forward and not necessarily have to be worried about funding? How can we help assist them in that area?
I'm glad you asked. Okay, because I was going to respond to the last statement, but you know, there's so much that has come down the pike in the last 5 years, at least, of policy, right? Me, I'm a policy wonk. I will read the tax bill, I read the Science Chips Act, whatever it comes out in science, tech, policy, I'm going to read it. HBCUs are in the best position right now to be ready for when the next releases of funds are going to come out. I cannot tell you how much money is getting ready to flood the streets, okay? And particularly as it relates to the MBDA. It is significantly going to be HBCUs, MSIs. Now the question is, are you going to have your antennas out there enough to be able to see when it's coming, know how to respond, and have partners who are willing to respond with you? So my thing was going to be conducting an ecosystem assessment. Who are our core partners? What building blocks do we have? What gaps are we missing? and how do we, and what sources do we need for funding? A couple of things to build on top of that. MBA funding is already coming down. There's also something coming down from NSF, National Science Foundation. There's a whole directorate that works with business schools, social, behavioral, economic sciences. None of them are writing grants from HBCUs to say, hey, we want to try something and use it as a social, behavioral, economic research study, $5 million. You got an experiment, design it, send it to SBE, or send it to Office of Integrated Activities. Most HBCU business schools do not write grants to National Science Foundation. That is a significant resource tool. There's actually $10 billion going into National Science Foundation's Technology Innovation Partnerships, which is going to support, building up innovation centers on campuses, right? You're talking about innovation centers on campus. There's over $50 billion being allocated to, $10 billion being allocated to that over the next 5 years, where we're going to build up innovation centers, test beds, commercialization hubs. How can we be ready for that if we're not even building the building blocks, right? This stuff is coming down fast. It's going to come down very fast, particularly as it gets closer to midterms or after midterms. They're closing out the fiscal year 22 at the end of this month, which means all this money has to be out the door in the next 9 months. EDA funding. EDA has $1.5 billion. How many HBCUs applied to get EDA funding? Giving out $500,000. St. Augustine did an amazing job with saying, hey, listen, we want a planning grant, $500,000. It's not about having, where's our resources? It's like, what is our dreams, our growth, and our aspirations? There is enough money out there. And I'm sure I brought in over $15 million, and she's probably brought in over 25 plus. There's ways of getting it, but if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a aspiration, a shared aspiration, then it's not going to be, it's going to be for naught. So, there's a lot of federal funding out there. There's a lot of folks who are looking for, inclusive innovation or looking for places to go. I serve Nashville. Where's Nashville? Tennessee State, right? In Nashville. Vanderbilt just got approved to become a regional innovation hub for the entire mid-Southeast. $5 billion, I believe. Are we connecting up to the institutions around us to be a part of the ecosystem? Because that's over a 10-year period. There's the Research Innovation Engines with National Science Foundation. That's another, $2 billion, I believe? Are we connecting up to be a part of that ecosystem? So this is something which is being engaged, being ready, and being prepared to take care of these opportunities.
So we have another question? Okay.
Oh, no, I was going to answer the previous question. No, we're fine. I know we're fine.
Salvanos Udoka, I'm right here at CAU. There's this notion, really, of this gathering of an effort for us in this CAU space, business school space, to collaborate. You've all talked about that. And building blocks, just mentioned. Could those building blocks be the entities that you all run? Because in efforts to collaborate across our schools, we have to connect to entities like yours. How could that work to help accelerate what we're trying to do in the entrepreneurship space?
If it's a question, one, we wouldn't be here if we weren't honored to work with all of you. I think the first thing is a phone call, and to say this is what we're thinking. I think going back to the plan, again, Russell Center back then partnered with Clark Atlanta on an EDA grant. It's very successful. It was a notion of the then president who brought it to the Russell family, and it was put on the table, and it was worked through. And so I think giving some time, being early versus late to the opportunity, I think is really, really important. And the last thing I would add is there should be a portfolio of things that y'all want that we should have in a catalog. And you may say, wow, I really wanted this, but I'm not the right one, but he's the right one. Can we make it happen, right? I'll catch the next one. If you can actually do that, we don't leave money on the table, because nobody's going to leave the money sitting there. Somebody else is going to take your competitor's going to take the money. So I think, in my mind, that's sort of the first step.
And I'll just affirmatively say yes. Clark Atlanta, one of the, I think the recent $10 million grant they received on the data science research, we've created office space. So we'll have 3 of your data scientists actually in our space. And so we absolutely are open to that. And even back to the question about online, Tiffany talked about, yes, it's the curriculum, but it's also the real world. You know, we're creating space at the Russell Center. One of the things that's coming online is a fulfillment center on site. We partner with UPS, it's gonna be UPS store, but there's also gonna be some 3D printing labs there, as well as textile making on site. And so absolutely, and that's gonna be open to the community. We were part of the EDA grant recently from Georgia Tech. So we're partnered with Georgia Tech to build a mobile 3D printing lab, right? That's not only gonna be on site, but also go around the state.
And
so,
that had Spelman in it too.
yes, it did. Absolutely did have Spelman. So collaboration is huge for us. And so to James' point, sometimes let's just start with a conversation. Start with a phone call and figure out what we can do together from that standpoint.
I just want to challenge everybody here to take another step. We have a mechanism, an organization called the National HBCU Business Deans. Some of our schools like Clark and Morehouse, St. Augustine, are well in advance in their planning around innovation and entrepreneurship. Some of our schools are not. I think there needs to be a collaborative effort. You know, most of the mature companies have a diversity department or a community affairs department, and because of that, they know about the HBCUs. But their resources are finite and they're designed to be, I'll say it, performative. The companies that are making the most change are new companies, and not Delta and Coca-Cola. And I can't tell you how many corporate meetings I sit in where I talk about HBCUs, and someone pulls me aside and asks me, I heard you say HBCU, what does that mean? They don't know, and you're talking about CEOs that grew up in parts of the country and the world where there is no such thing. So that tells me as a marketing person, we have to do something collaboratively to talk about us in this space. The other thing is we're doing great things here in the Atlanta University Center and other cities, but there's still a disconnect between the innovation entrepreneurial ecosystem that's recognized in these cities by the rest of the world and what we're doing on these campuses. It's still viewed as a community affairs thing, not a this is a direct line to my business thing. So I want to challenge the business teams. We have the former past president, and I know earlier we had the president-elect here, and really hoping that something meaningful will come out of that discussion with some concrete steps, calls to action. So I challenge Dr. Udoka and Dr. Davis, who's one of the founders of that group, to look at how we could put something together. And to you, the panelists, I want to challenge you to be a part of that discussion with an actual roadmap that we can do collaboratively around this. I want to thank the panel for coming out, especially on short notice. I know you had a whole lot of different things you wanted to talk about, so we'll be asking you to come back. And I'm sure the deans will want to have you come back into their classrooms. So I want to thank you so much, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to our MC.
Thank you for tag teaming Tony. Now let's give this panelist a big round of applause. Our moderator, Paul Wilson Jr., Tiffany Rogers Bussey, James Harris, and Tariq Tidwell. Let's make them know they were here.